All right, prepare a new quad chart for jungle warfare. Still in the Vietnam War, and we're going to look at our central question: how were unconventional warfare, or UW tactics, applied during the Vietnam War? The great quote: General MacArthur, it's been over 10 years in the Pacific, said, "Never fight a ground war in Asia." This after, beating the Chinese back up, or beating the North Koreans back up to the Yalu River and engaging the Chinese before Truman pulled him out and bumbled the whole operation in Korea. So unconventional warfare, and these lessons, these tactics and strategies that General Zapp are going to apply really are a page out of Chairman Mao's book on unconventional warfare. So, it's going to be a long war, a war of attrition against enemy personnel aimed at inflicting the maximum casualties and death while maintaining your own preservation of force. Make the area of operations ungovernable except by a colonial military rule, which is going to drive the people away from that leadership and toward the communist guerrillas. Again, that's their main method of operation is controlling the population. If they have the support of the population, then they have the support of the country. And then define a war of liberation, punish collaborators, informers, and criminals. Anybody who doesn't support the cause at this point in time as an enemy. And this is kind of how they do it. They maintain their defenses in the jungle sanctuary, and they stay. Remember the strategic hamlet I talked about in the last lesson. One of the ways to try to separate them was to move the friendlies away from areas that we thought we would be fighting, but it was unsuccessful. And the Viet Minh start to maintain areas in the countryside that they really just can't get into with U.S. technological advances. So our aircraft can't do it. We can't see them. We can't find them. We can't find them. You can't kill them. So this really drives that unconventional or the guerrilla warfare tactic, because they rarely will engage in conventional warfare or force-on-force conflicts against the United States. The next thing to do is they employ Viet Cong, which are citizen soldiers, right? They blend in. They look like common citizens. They don't look like fighters. These people can come in and out of the villages. They have access and placement to things that regular Vietnamese soldiers would not have access to. And this, again, a page out of Chairman Mao's book, a quote that he says and said often was, "The guerrilla must move amongst the people as a fish swims in the sea." So effortlessly moving from people into combat areas and blending back in so that the forces can't separate you, can't find you. They can't find you. They can't kill you. Again, the primary weapon of the guerrilla fighter, of the revolutionist, is time. They have time on their side because it's their country. The occupying force does not have time because they deal with popular support. And if they don't have popular support, they can't continue to fight. Interesting in this photo, since I'm talking about popular support, if you look at how this Marine is sitting with his it's an M60, looks like an M60, maybe not, maybe an M14 with a bipod over the tombstone there in a cemetery. And if you think about Buddhist culture, how sacred they consider to be these locations and how sacred they consider to be their family, this is incredibly disrespectful. And it's a way that, both the communist guerrilla and the U.S. forces are trying to win popular support. And things like this and things the way this individual is being treated as he's being questioned erode that support and almost always force people to the other side. Again, continue hit and run tactics. Charlie doesn't have technology, right? He doesn't have access to aircraft and the things that the United States government does. But what he does have is an active imagination. So this device or this weapon was called a punji pit. What they would do is they would take wooden stakes, sharpen them up, and they would put them in the ground. They would cover it with camouflage so that as you come across that, you would step on it. And that's not really the end of it, because they would contaminate these things with urine and human feces, so that when you step through this, and it would cause damage to your foot, cut up the side of your leg, but the ensuing infection is really what caused the lasting effects and made this so effective as almost a homemade landmine. They also developed a logistical trail network that was accessible outside of the country of Vietnam. So the Ho Chi Minh Trail was actually in the countries of Laos and Cambodia, two countries we were not at war with, and we weren't going into, at least initially, we weren't going into and doing anything against these two countries or this logistical supply network. They also developed underground systems of hiding, caching weapons and equipment, storing food, and operating. So here would be a similar or an example of one in a village near a river where there was access within the village, maybe underneath a cooking pot, and access under the water line of the river where they could swim up and get into or out of this tunnel system if they're being searched. They have both ingress and egress routes. A more elaborate tunnel system, maybe for an entire unit, would be underground. You can see this one has cooking facilities with filtered vents for the smoke to get out. It has ammunition supply, places to sleep, and also, you see these protected elements of punji stakes to keep people from coming into them. And this is how we start to see in Vietnam the term tunnel rat come about. So those people in the infantry who were had to go in and clear these things would go in with just a 45 caliber pistol and a flashlight, and they would go down and they would try to clear these out. And you can see several places they have trap doors put in place so that you would hit a dead end and think that was the end of the tunnel, when in fact these could go on for several miles. General Zapp's three-phase strategy, and again, this is a textbook out of Chairman Mao's on guerrilla warfare. Form guerrilla bands first. You really create a cadre or a training base of people that are supportive to the cause, and you start to expand that. As you expand that, you go to phase two, which is ambush and assassination to challenge the South Vietnamese legitimacy. And then third, finally, is the spread of force-on-force conventional warfare with the North Vietnamese army against Americans and the South Vietnamese. It's the same concept that we look at in counterinsurgency doctrine today. Is everywhere around the world, this model of guerrilla warfare has been applied. Still, as an unconventional war, really we're a conventional force, and we want to fight conventionally with aircraft and with tanks and technology. But the terrain there really limits that, which leaves the infantry really unsupported out on the ground all by themselves, fighting in dense vegetation without the ability to use this conventional military technology that we have. So we have to refine our strategies. We have to do some things that are very different to give us an advantage. One of those things is a weapon developed called napalm. Napalm is an incendiary weapon, which means it's flame, it's sticky, it's like a jelly-like substance that if it gets on your skin, you can't get it off, and it burns until the fuel is gone. You can think about getting something stuck on your hand and flipping it, trying to get it off. This would constantly be sticking and clinging to your hands as it burned. And it just ignites in massive clouds, and it would use this very close range in some of the firefights they were in. They would also use it to remove the foliage from trees so that they could see if they could burn down some of the foliage that our aircraft could see inside down under triple canopy jungle to where the Viet Cong or the Vietnamese were actually fighting. Another weapon that we developed really wasn't a weapon to be used as a weapon. It kind of turned out that way in its effects, but was Agent Orange. Agent Orange was a defoiling agent that was put on the vegetation to try to get the leaves to fall. Same thing as what I just said. So you could actually use your aircraft to see down to the ground, and in doing so, you would make it effective for bombing. Everywhere in red on this map are areas that Agent Orange was applied. And if you think of this, and here especially in the South, where we had a lot of forces and a lot of the service members experienced lasting health problems because of exposure to high levels of this herbicide. Not only did our service members experience it, but lasting effects on the countryside in Vietnam were birth deformities that would have happened from just this chemical exposure. And here you can see, unintended consequences. Agent Orange killed 400,000 people, more people than we killed with napalm, when napalm was actually developed as a weapon. And Agent Orange was developed as something to use to help us fight, not necessarily be used against people. Again, new tactics had to be evolved because technology wasn't working, right? The technology that we had. So one of those things was we evolved cavalry from being mobile cavalry, like armored or horse cavalry in the past, to being air cavalry. So the new horse is going to be the Huey helicopter, and you could get this helicopter in and out of areas. They would destroy areas of vegetation with artillery, and then they could fly the helicopters in and they could offload soldiers and get them out. The fight would go on, and then they would bring the helicopters back in and they would take the soldiers out after that. An ability to move people around the battlefield very, very fast, and a capability that was proven in combat in Vietnam. Jet aircraft like the F-4 Phantom here fly high in the air, not very effective in jungle terrain, simply because they can't see what they're bombing down on the ground, and oftentimes they would miss their targets. And then the infantry has to become much more adaptive. You're fighting a war on the ground, a ground you have to occupy, an enemy you have to find and separate from friendly, so that you can fight them. And they do this in villages and towns, in the countryside, everywhere out there, constantly on the hunt. And they called this search and destroy. These missions are search and destroy missions, where you would actually go out and walk around the battlefield until you found the enemy, engage him in combat, and try to kill him. The weapons that we used were really, in this environment, inferior to the weapons that the Vietnamese have. On top, you have, this is a newer version of an M16. They would have an older version of an M16 in Vietnam. It's still a 5.56 millimeter rifle, machined precision, right? So that the bolt carrier group fits tightly into the upper receiver. And if anything gets in rust, mud, dirt, debris get in there, it doesn't function properly. Compare that to the AK series of weapons that were stamped metal, and they have very loose fitting parts. You could submerge this in the water, throw it down in the mud, completely corroded, full of trash and garbage from the battlefield, and that weapon will still fight. So the enemy with less technology, really a poorer quality weapon, had an advantage when fighting on these search and destroy operations. And the search and destroy operations were really the brainchild of General Westmoreland, the commander of all forces in Vietnam. And really how he was driven by body counts and by numbers of operation, number of days in combat. For example, the average number of days in combat for an infantryman in World War II was 10. Amazingly, you think about the disasters on D-Day and how intense the fighting was. They spent 10 days in combat. The average infantryman spent 240 days in combat in Vietnam. And finally, the result, or the goal of this, was to destroy all of the enemies. And I'll end with this short video from Apocalypse Now.
Shall we dance? Spotted a large weapon down below. We're going to go down and check it out. All right, this is what a shot. Outstanding, Red Team. Outstanding. Get your case of beer for that.
All right, again, just so how you see evolution in tactics, that would have been the air cavalry moving infantrymen out on a search and destroy operation. So you've got the improvement in technology, using the aircraft to come in and dominate the countryside that was being occupied and utilized by the Vietnamese.